Now, we spoke about the fact that human consciousness is a form of awareness, right? Now we need to expand on it a little bit, right? What is the difference between human consciousness and all kinds of other awarenesses, right? If you think of the microbiome in your gut, it's a form of awareness. It reacts differently to different kinds of foods. So it has an awareness, but it doesn't have free choice. The sunflower moves as the sun moves from east to west, at least in most places. It moves with the sun. It doesn't have a free choice. It doesn't wake up one morning and says, you know what, today I'm not gonna move around. Yeah, forget it. Don't feel like it. There's no free choice, but it is an awareness. Higher forms of awareness, take for instance lions, right? It's a much higher form of awareness. Lions hunt only when they're hungry. You rarely see a lion hunt for sport. So it has free choice, but the free choice is very limited. It supports its basic needs. The higher the awareness, the more freedom of choice it has. So supposedly, humans, they have the most free choice. That's what a lot of philosophies talk about. But we just realized in the last few episodes that our real free choice is not as wide and not as common as we tend to tell ourselves. It's not completely free. There's a big factor of automation there. So we gradually start to realize that our real free choice is a lot more limited than we tend to believe. So the question is, how do we expand it? And how do we live in a world where we have real free choice and not the illusion of it? Because a lot of our free choice, as we learned in the last chapter, it's an illusion. We tell ourselves a story. It's really a drive that drives us, and we're subject to it, and it comes from our wounding, from our pain, from our past, from all kinds of places. So let's understand a little bit deeper how this structure works. Our consciousness is comprised from two parts. There is the unconscious self. Now, what is the unconscious self? The unconscious self includes the subconscious and the higher self. Now, think about it this way. Who beats our heart? Who pumps our blood? Who operates our glands? Where do all our suppressed fears suppressed? Where does the shadow reside? Where does our shame hide? It all happens in our unconscious self. Now, some in the subconscious, and again, some other functions in the higher self, but together they comprise the unconscious self. We have limited influence on all those factors until we become aware, and on some of them, we don't have influence. We can somewhat regulate our heart, but we can't completely stop it, or we can't accelerate it above a certain level. Why? Because we don't have access to it. We can't stop pumping our blood, unless we take some extreme measures, of course. We don't have much influence. We can somewhat influence some of the factors, but most of the functions of the unconscious self, we don't have access to, and we're not conscious of it. Now, the autopilot lives in the unconscious self until we become gradually more and more conscious of it. Our unconscious self operates much more than we realize. Now that I'm talking about it, it expands your realization, first of its existence, and second of all kinds of aspects of you that it operates. But it actually operates a lot more than you can imagine. To the extent that we need to understand it for this purpose, our unconscious self is designed to generate what is best for us. Meaning, it's designed to keep us alive, to keep us safe and alive. So all the functions that need to happen for us to be alive and safe, the unconscious self runs, and I'm talking about the functions that our conscious self does not touch. So we're conscious when we're hungry, we're conscious, we eat. So there's a lot of functions that the conscious self, but everything beyond that runs by our unconscious self. Now, what happens when our needs or our true desires come into conflict with the functioning of the unconscious self? For example, we want to improve our life and we need to face some scary truths, and we're afraid of it, and fear is identified as something that does not keep us safe. It's a signal for the unconscious self. That means we're not safe. Then the unconscious self needs to decide. There's a conflict between what we want, what our true desire is, and the function and the programming of the unconscious self. Okay? Now, this creates a fork in the road. Since the function, the designated function of the unconscious self is to keep us alive and well, and fear is an indicator that we might not be well, or down the road maybe not be alive, because that's the same signal, the unconscious self needs to operate, which means that it will block that process. It will block everything on that path. And if that means admitting some truths that are uncomfortable, that's what it's going to do, because that's the programming of the unconscious self. All right? Now, we realize that we have two functions. The conscious self is everything that we are aware of as a self. The parts of us that we are fully aware, that's the conscious self. And it's a fluid definition. It's individual, and different people are aware of different aspects of themselves. But that's it. That's simple. The unconscious self goes beyond that. So the conscious self is really a subset of the unconscious self. And in some situations, they come into conflict, because I know that I want to improve myself. I know I want to heal, because now, after I've done the last few installments, I know that some pain that I still holds me back from my perfected life. And I want to heal that, and I want to face it. The fear comes up, and now the unconscious self kicks in, because the unconscious self, as I said, it's an automated program. It kicks in and it blocks me from doing it. So the question is, how can I outsmart a much smarter opponent? Because the unconscious self is the bigger me. The conscious self is only a subset, which means that the unconscious self is fully aware of any thought, any plan, any desire, anything that happens inside the conscious self. So any plan that I can conceive, that I can come up with, any thought that comes up in my mind, the unconscious self not only is fully aware of it, it also knows about it before it comes to the conscious self. So now we defined a pretty deep conundrum. How do we outsmart a much more powerful and all-knowing opponent? That's what we're dealing with. We have one trick up our sleeve, and this tool is called free will. Free will is our secret power, because free will resides only, exclusively in the conscious self. And that is the only advantage we have when we're trying to outsmart and outmaneuver the unconscious, our own unconscious self, which will do anything to keep us safe, including changing our hearing, changing our mindset, activating bodily function, etc., etc. I can't tell you how many times in my interactions with people in one-on-one, we get to a very hard truth, a very painful truth, and all of a sudden they go, "Can you hold that thought for a second? I really have to go to the bathroom." And it happens so consistently that I'm not even surprised. Or all of a sudden, they just tune out, or they fall asleep, or all kinds of other behaviors. All of a sudden, something distracts them, or they start getting itchy. There's all kinds. This is an example of the unconscious self activating bodily functions to distract the mind so they won't perceive. In some cases, people literally don't hear the words. They tune them out. So it's a very powerful opponent. The only tool we have to outmaneuver that opponent is free will. Because free will, real free will, resides only in the conscious self. The unconscious self is a fully automated program. Okay? Now, as such, you can understand that this is the true difference between the human awareness, the human consciousness, and every other type of consciousness. And there are many types, as I demonstrated earlier. Okay? Now, true freedom really is liberation from our own automatic program. That is the matrix. And the matrix is not uniform. The matrix is individual. It's different for each and every one of us. And as long as we're subject to our automatic program, we don't really have free choice. Only an illusion of it. And everything about us, our choices, our needs, our desires, our preferences, everything is an outcome of the accumulated previous events and our reaction to them. Helps you look at yourself from the outside and see your patterns and identify your issues and see the automatic program in action. The more proficient you are with this tool, the more you will see it. Now, our fear lives in the mind. Generally, it operates through the mind. It expresses itself through the mind. It lives in different parts of the body, but it expresses itself through the mind. Which means that most of the choices, most of the what we believe is free will that comes from the mind is not free will. It's tainted either fully or partially by the fear that resides in our templates. Which means that true free will, true free choice can only be found in the heart. So any desire or aspiration that is not coming from the heart is either completely or partially outcome of the automatic program. Now I know it's a hard pill to swallow, but this is why I said early on in this course that honesty with yourself is such a important quality and important commodity to have. It's hard to face it, but when you face it, you just have done a major leap forward. When you're willing to acknowledge that most of what your life experience has been up to this point is an outcome. It's not truly your free choice. Now, when we admit it to ourselves, that's one of the biggest steps towards liberating ourselves from the matrix, from the program. It's a huge step towards discovering our true nature, our divine nature.